Hello, I am Julie Meyerowitz, and I am here with Sharon Sargeant, and we're going to be talking today about dynamic intelligence as opposed to static intelligence and why it's important when we're talking about autism, why that's so important for us to know. So Sharon Sargeant, can you please introduce yourself in broader terms than just your name?
I'm Sharon Sargeant, formerly Barbara Carnett. I'm an RDI consultant and I have a daughter who is 28 years old on the autistic spectrum, as well as two other children in their young adult lives now rather than children. But yeah, that's me.
So what is your relationship to autism? You mentioned your daughter, but I think you've also been very active with bringing treatments to England.
Yeah, my relationship with autism, and she was diagnosed when she was 3 years old, and basically before that even I was looking for how to help her, and in the UK we really didn't have much back then. Then by the time she was 3.5, I'd heard about ABA. So we started ABA and was one of the first 6 families in the UK to start using ABA. When she was around the age of 6, we didn't have the miracle that ABA sort of promised. And so I would continue to look for different ways to help her. But it wasn't until she was 12 that I found out about a relationship development intervention, RDI. And again, was one of the first to actually bring the intervention, the program into the UK. And it was from going to a parent training in Atlanta that I found out more about RDI, and I'd already got an RDI consultant lined up to go and visit. So we were in America for a month while we were actually trying to look at how to help our daughter. And it was from that training and then the consultant we got onto our own RDI program. And I was just blown away from how quickly adapting some of the strategies, I suppose you could say, the early side of it as I was learning with her, the changes I was seeing so quickly, and I just thought, okay, I need to bring this to the UK too.
So I also want to share that you were my supervisor in RDI when you
was.
That was an adventure. So, you were very patient with me and all my questions and answered them very clearly and very well. So how would you define autism?
Autism is a neurological disorder, and basically it affects the social communication, emotional interaction, and there's then a mismatch between how parents try to communicate with their child and their child's processing and ability to actually communicate back. So that feedback loop of you know, I'm trying to reach you, I'm trying to help you to gain in your social emotional development doesn't happen, and that's what naturally happens in parents and child relationship. But that doesn't come into place because there is this mismatch where parents are trying to give all this information, the child's not ready for it, and the times when the child is ready for it, quite often the parents have moved on, so they've missed it.
I have actually, I'm thinking about also, I'm thinking back to your answer earlier. And of course, your definition is similar to my definition. My definition is probably very much based on the education that you provided to me. But you were saying like there was a promise that you had expected from ABA that you, after a certain amount of time, you felt wasn't coming true for you. And then there were certain things that you were doing through RDI that were coming together very quickly. So can you first talk about that? What were your expectations through ABA?
Okay, so I heard about ABA from a book, Let Me Hear Your Voice, which was put together by a parent. I, for the life of me, cannot think of her name at the moment. It was a very long time ago. She basically had 2 children on the spectrum, and she hired somebody to come into her home who had been trained by Dr. Lovas. But from the way that it's written, and now looking back, I think there were slight changes to the protocol, and that this individual brought their own personality and their own knowledge into that relationship, and that may have been part of what made a difference. But from reading that book, and both of her children, she said that she'd recovered from autism. So I sort of bought into that, hoped that that's where we were going to go. And I did know along my journey of people that, you know, parents that did say that they saw that for their child, but that didn't happen for us. My daughter has, which we found out further along the line, it wasn't just an autism diagnosis. She's got speech and language disorder and a learning disorder. And so that possibly played a part in, you know, the fact that she couldn't make the progress that I'd read about. But there were so many children not making that same progress. When she started at school, she needed someone to go into school with her, and basically she was very, very dependent, prompt dependent on anyone and everyone. But she would also do just enough to interact, to get you off her back. So if you were trying to, I know, help her decide on choosing something, she would do just enough for you to then say, oh, okay, fine, there you are, and then she'd be off. You know, she'd left the building, if you like. And so there was a big part missing. I mean, we had a relationship of a sort, but it wasn't like the relationship I had with my other children.
Right. Is she your youngest, the youngest of your 3 children?
No, she's my eldest.
Oh.
She's 28, and then I've got a 24 and a 21-year-old. So yeah, it was a bit of an eye-opener there. And then when we started doing RDI, when we first went on the parent training course, I was in Dr. Shealy's parent group, and she talked about how you could just do some changes in your communication style, and that would make a difference with your child. And she talked of a telephone conversation that she'd actually, well, it wasn't a telephone conversation she had, it was a meeting she had with a parent who had an adult on the spectrum. And they were just talking in making comments rather than asking loads of questions, which is the trap that so many of us with children with autism fall into, because you're not getting this feedback. So you start to go into, well, let me, pull it out. And not knowing that actually by trying to pull it out, we're pushing the child further away. So anyway, with this particular conversation that Dr. Shealy talked about, the mother, for the first time, by making comments, heard her daughter give a comment of just her own opinion or something that was going on without her mum having to literally pull it out of her. And the mum was like completely, thought it's magical.
Right.
And I thought, okay, well, there's something in this. And so we was actually on holiday, go to our own consultant, all in one. And that particular evening, our ABA tutor that had been looking after our children during the day came to a restaurant with us. So there's a group of 5 of us, no, 6 of us, can't count, 6 of us in this restaurant. And we'd talked to her beforehand about what was going on in how to communicate, how to make declarative comments that were invitational.
Daughter about that? Who did you speak to about?
The tutor that was with us.
Okay.
So as we were sitting around the table in this Chinese restaurant, they had these big lanterns, the big wall lanterns on different areas of the restaurant. And I can't remember the comment that I actually made, but I made a comment, and Alicia didn't actually respond to that at all. So we'd been told this might happen. And then I said something else, and again, she didn't really respond. And then the ABA tutor turned around and said, I've got one of those at home. My one's purple. And then Alicia looked in the room and made a comment, I like that pink one over there. And it was like, oh, wow, you know, this is something spontaneous that I haven't had to do too much at all. It was just such a big difference. And it was from that we didn't look back. You know, we were just basically, this is the way forward. This is what we need to be doing.
I think the other thing that illustrates is that people are anxious for like a breakthrough because they're so frustrated with like all these accumulative little moments and big breakdowns and everything like that. But it also illustrates it doesn't have to be big. Like, I like the pink one. Pivotal for her.
It was because she actually shared her opinion without us having to quiz her into, you know, and prompt her to actually think about and look at and consider. And we didn't have to do any of that. We just put some comments out there, and that was enough to invite her to actually respond.
Yeah, and then the words were hers instead of a
yeah
to like
yeah
try to guess what you wanted. Great.
Yeah, it made a big difference. And also, as we went on, her problem solving and her thinking for herself developed too. There was an element early on where I was transitioning in my mindset of how, you know, to implement RDI. And I remember that I was just doing cooking. We'd always done cooking together. And I was doing cooking with her, and we were using a recipe book. And I found that I was like, well, get this, now do this, now we need to add that. And it was from my RDI consultant sort of looking at it and helping me to think about, well, how could you do that differently? And it was after that I would then sort of push the recipe book to the side and start to do it more organically between us. And we'd cooked so many times before that basically the cooking pattern of making cakes isn't a lot different across recipes.
Right.
And so then it would be a case of us cooking together and leaving a space for her to think about, oh, should we put the eggs in now, you know, rather than me saying, okay, now add the eggs, now mix it up. So she started to come out of her shell a little bit and start to make decisions of when was the right time to do things rather than waiting to be told when to do things. Right. And I think that was the beginning of that journey as well.
And realizing that she had something to contribute.
Yeah, and her realizing that she had something to contribute.
Her realization.
Yeah, her realizing, but also mine.
Right.
It's a case of building up trust, trust that she wanted to learn, trust that she could learn.
Trust and her.
Yeah, and trusting me to not jump in and overtake and try and push her through. So yeah, it was a big difference, and initially it did take some switching of that mindset to be able to do that. When we started, there was a slightly different focus to what RDI is now. RDI helps parents a lot more than it did. Initially, it focused, like most of the treatments, on the child. And so the goals initially were all around experience sharing and emotion sharing. But then that shifted to be more to help the parents to change how they approach. So you get that experience sharing, emotion sharing as well, but it's not geared to just changing the child, if you like.
Right. So what do you think brought about that change, that shift to being more parent focused? Because I think a lot of people that I speak to, like, they're used to things that are focused, like, well, the child is the one who's having the struggle, so that's where the focus should be. And it's very hard to communicate why we would focus more on the parents.
So why did that change happen?
And
That came.
what effect have you seen, like in your own work, since that shift has taken place?
It came from Dr. Gutzler and Dr. Shealy, in their recognition that there were families that were stuck in what was back then stage 1. And it was from their work and Dr. Gutzstein's interest in research. And so he started to change the program and recognise that there were elements of it that needed attention, and that part of that was the parent training. And that parent training back then was actually very unique in, you know, that no other treatments, as you say, focused on, well, you know, it's not just the child, it's the situation that, you know, the whole family environment needs to aid the child's learning.
Right. Because if it's about relationship, it's not just about getting the child to relate without the environment shifting.
Yeah.
Like if we shift, then it's a dance. If we shift, then have no.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of that was already in place as part of the RDI protocol, but it wasn't in black and white. It wasn't there saying, you know, that this needs to be done in order for that to happen. It was more sort of like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then it became a little bit more, well, there's a parent curriculum now, isn't there? So, yeah. So, yeah, the changes were definitely positive.
Yeah, so it was, you were saying that it was coming about because the consultants were saying that families were getting stuck. So now that the focus is on the parents, have they become unstuck, or is there less of that going on? Like, what do you?
I think there's still an element of some, you know, in every intervention that some people get it more easily and readily than other people do. Some people still find it quite hard work because that shift in mindset it's not easy for them, so they need a lot more hand holding, and some people it's not going to come into place for them because it just sort of goes against how they think and feel, or they're looking for quick results, and RDI is not a quick result. You know, it's you're putting into place thousands and thousands of hours of missing development,
right,
interaction that didn't happen, so you're not going to get that all in place in 6 months.
Right. So, but for those who do embrace what it is, that it's like this parent focused, now a shift to that, in order to fill in that lost time, not because the parents were lax or didn't provide it, but because the children couldn't benefit from what the parents were trying to provide. Mm-hmm. For those who do, like kind of get their hands dirty and do this kind of work, are you saying that stuckness is resolved?
From my experience, if parents can embrace RDI and it becomes part of their lifestyle, you start to forget how you were parenting your child on the spectrum before, and it just seems more natural, because basically RDI is based on that natural relationship, child-parent relationship anyway. There are, for me personally, there are elements of RDI that has helped with my parenting in general. Whether I had a child on the spectrum or not, there are parts of it that I feel has been highly beneficial to the way I parent my children. Mainly moving away from instructing and having expectations that are possibly a little bit unrealistic, I don't know. But it's having a better relationship in general, just by putting in some of the basic mindset around RDI. So some of that could be around, you know, pausing and allowing that child to actually get their own thought process together. And everybody needs the ability to get the thought process together, and we all have differing amounts of time we need to be able to do that, and that's dependent on the context, the scenario, situation that you're in at any one point in time as well. So I think that I am so much more patient a person than I ever was years ago. And I think that's a big part of RDI for me too.
That's also like Western culture, like that so much like like we're all working and in the home, out of the home, and we feel pressured.
Mm,
Definitely something like this pausing and slowing down. It's something that in order for it to happen, it has to be conscious.
absolutely, it does, because we are, to do that, you are fighting against mainstream, aren't you? You're fighting against what everybody else is doing. I mean, it was years ago when I was being brought up, you know, you didn't have all the clubs and you didn't have all the social media and everything that's competing for the time and energy that's out there now. So it's a case of being able to say, well, no, I'm going to go against the norm, and this is how we're going to have our lifestyle. I'm not going to rush from club to club. It's not my children never went to clubs, it's just that there was a priority over which ones. They didn't go to absolutely everything that was available.
And what I'm thinking is, just like if you just think about how often we are pinged, like on whatever device, and how often like your children or adults, how often our children are pinged versus in a family home, how often the phone used to ring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like we could, like we're constantly being pulled. Like,
Yeah. If I think back to when I was a child, if the phone rang, it was like, oh, who's that for?
right. And then you had to have a conversation in order, like with the person and like with the family, to like even just get that connection to happen, as opposed to ping, 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 and like, and that just takes you away from everything.
I mean, we did have a little bit of competition with the television, but there wasn't even as much available as there is now, and it definitely wasn't on 24 hours.
But even the television, you had to have a conversation to determine what to watch.
Yeah.
As opposed to right now, this is actually what's, I'm ashamed to say, what's happening in my house right now. My husband's working on his computer behind me. I'm with you here. My one daughter is actually reading a book right now, and the other daughter, so that you and I could have a conversation, is watching a video downstairs. And I try and stay conscious of that, and as soon as we're done, to like really be engaged with the girls afterwards. But like, it's very easy, especially like during COVID and everything, it's very easy to slip into like a whole day can go by with everybody on their own screen. Yeah.
That was one of the early things that we did do actually, when we came back, was to make time, was to have certain times. I mean, I began my training at this, like 6 months into doing RDI with my daughter. And so I was working with clients and families, and I needed time to be able to be on a screen. But we had times when there was nothing on, you know, that it would go off at say 10 in the morning and would not come back on again until 3 in the afternoon. And so the rest of that time we were doing things in the same vicinity, not necessarily all together doing the same thing, but the screens weren't getting in the way. That was just part and parcel of our home rules.
And something that strikes me about what you just said, I know I'm like picking out that, so your daughter had at that point been in ABA for 9 years?
Yeah.
And then after 6 months, you were compelled enough by RDI to make that your career.
Yeah.
So what did you see in those 6 months? So there's that moment, I like the pink one.
She wanted to be around us, where before, as I said, it was just like she'd do just enough to say, okay, I've done it, leave me alone. She was interacting more with the family as a whole. Shared attention started to come into place, where I wasn't really aware of what shared attention was up until that point, you know, with her. I mean, it was obviously happening with my other children. It's just, I hadn't noticed it with her. And there was, ABA is so sort of rule based, and you start to get so blinkered. What in our ABA that was, I can't talk for everybody's. Start to get so blinkered, and you're trying to hit this goal and you want that at the end of it, where RDI is a little bit like that. You've got your goals, but they happen, they sort of evolve as you're working through it. You're not training for the goal as such.
And I think also a major difference is in that process, it's the accomplishment is the child's.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we're proud of them, and we also have put work into it, but then at the end of that process, it's not like, okay, I've done what you want, now give me my prize. It's I've developed something within myself that I now own for the child.
Which comes back to that, the static versus the dynamic. So yeah, with the static side of it, you learn the rules, you learn the sequence, you learn the repetition side of it, but you don't necessarily come away with the reasoning of why you're doing what you're doing. And that was one of the main things, I think, for her, was that suddenly she was having to think a little bit more for herself, and she was being listened to.
Right.
You know, we'd moved so far away from that because we got so caught up in fixing her,
right.
And making life easier for her, that we was actually doing the opposite.
Right.
Because we thought, you know, well, I thought, and at times it absolutely made me feel completely drained,
right.
is how do I teach her every rule for every scenario that might ever happen in her life? You just can't do it. So, you know, we were putting all these different measures into place where you learn how to do this and that, and then this will happen at the end. But it doesn't always happen, because life...
When we can create it, we can make it happen that way. But how does it generalize when we send her out into the world and somebody has taken the piece that we would have had ready, or somebody has introduced an element that we would have blocked out because we would have known it was distracting? So can we just take a step back? Can you define, at least in your own terms, dynamic intelligence as opposed to static intelligence? Because that's really what we're here to...
Okay, so the static side is learning all the different rules that go along with day-to-day life, and we need a little bit of that. We all do. I mean, even with what's going on in the world at the moment, there are rules out there to try and help us all keep safe, and so we are having to follow things that and do things in a particular order. So if you go into a shop, then you make sure you've got your mask on, etc. So they're just things that we follow because they're guidelines that we need to do. But there will always be exceptions to the rules, and that's where the dynamic side comes in. So with my daughter, before that, she would do things, I don't know, complete a puzzle, and then she gets a reward at the end of it, or she's done 10 maths. You don't say maths, do you?
Math problems, I think you would say.
Yeah, okay. So she would do the maths problems, and then she would get a reward at the end of it. And so it wasn't about learning about herself and how to do those problems. It was, at the end of this, I get to have whatever it is, and then I can walk away from it. And that's basically how her learning was going. So it became very...
Also, what you were describing is, it was sort of like she was engaging with it as, I'm willing to be bothered in order to get this prize, as opposed to I'm interested in the learning itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas if we go back, I mean, maths is still an issue for my daughter. She really hates maths, and I'm a little bit with her there on.
People who aren't on the spectrum hate math.
If we go back to like the cooking, so with following a recipe, you do not need to think. You just need to make sure you've got all your ingredients there. So there is a little bit of thinking. If you haven't got it in the house, what are you going to do? How are you going to, are you going to substitute that? That's dynamic thinking. Am I going to go out and buy that because I can just do that quickly? That's dynamic thinking. But if you've got all the ingredients there and you're just following a recipe, put this in, do that, stir this, use your mixer, put it into a case, put it in there. It's static. You don't have to think about that at all. Whereas the dynamic side of that is, well, maybe you're making cookies and some of them you need to have nuts in, but then there's somebody in your house that can't have nuts. So how are you going to do this time? You know, how many cookies are you going to have with nuts in, and how are you going to keep the nuts separate from the chocolate chips, and you know, so that everybody can have some cookies. So that's more dynamic thinking, of thinking about the problem issues and solving around that, and being motivated to do so because you want to please that person, or you want to feel good about that person getting something that they like, rather than, you know, just, well, I've done 6 nuts and I've done 6 chocolate chips, without thinking about why you're doing that.
So with autism specifically, why is this dichotomy important to be aware of between static and dynamic intelligence?
I think
it's significant for all of us, but why is it particularly significant for autism?
Because research shows that children on the spectrum can learn rote, static, relatively easy. What they really stumble on is the dynamic thinking. And so if something happens and the situation isn't going quite as they thought, then they get stuck. They literally cannot go anywhere else. And I suppose like an example of that could be with the cooking ingredients. They come to a point where they don't have what they need. So what do? Is they just give up on the cooking? Do they walk away? Do they have a meltdown, a temper tantrum, so that somebody else does it for them? Or do they stop and think, well, you know, it's not a big deal. Best fit and good enough is a part of that dynamic intelligence as well. So could it be that just because that one little ingredient is missing, it's not really going to make that big a difference, so let's cook it anyway. It's only for the family to eat. It's not for guests or for a particular event. So you would base good enough for this situation. And on the spectrum,
soda, or is it chocolate chips? Because like that can make a difference. Like, is it the flavor, or is it like actually
yeah,
a little,
yeah. I mean, if you were somebody that had to be careful with money, obviously that would play a part in how you're going to cook and present your food too, and what ingredients you're going to use. That would all be part of being able to juggle and think dynamically, rather than being stuck in this rule base and it's got to be a certain way. And the problem with rule based in a certain way is it sets you up for failure. So if it always has to be that way, and then our kids on the spectrum are very quick to come away with negative thoughts about themselves, and it's very hard to get them back from that. Very hard to get them back. Because so rarely do things actually play out in that way, you're saying? Or they don't have enough experience of feeling competent, because they're not given that space to think for themselves. So when they are given the space and it doesn't work out, it's like falling off a cliff.
Right.
You basically start to get memories of, I'm useless at this, I can't do this, I'm not good at this, which none of us, I mean, we all have an element of that, but if you've got it all the time, you just don't feel competent in what you're doing. Or if somebody always jumps in and bails it out for you, then you are going to come away with those negative memories. So a big part of RDI is to build those I can memories, or we can.
Agency, like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I can influence you and you can influence me, and you're not going to just take over. That's the part of the trust. You're not going to just jump in, overcompensate for me and rob me basically of my learning experience.
And I don't think the parents are thinking that I'm robbing them in that moment.
Well, no, but you know, I'm sort of thinking from.
It's not their success. It's really.
Yeah. It's a case of if we jump in too soon and think, you know, if our mindset is, oh no, they're going to fail, they're going to have a big meltdown, they're going to, you know, life is going to be awful for the rest of the day because this one little thing, then as a parent, you are going to keep jumping in because you don't want the whole household to be falling apart for the rest of the day or more because your child hasn't been successful. So we try to help our child to be successful by jumping in.
Right.
So it's like, you know, you go round in circles, in, you know, a vicious circle, basically, that our children need to learn to make mistakes. They need to learn how to benefit from making mistakes.
Because the world is full, I mean, like, the world is full of mistakes. And the world is
Absolutely.
full of, and every person, like, we can't know what's going to happen when we walk out the door, if that's an opportunity that you've had recently. Well, like, when we like enter into interactions with the world, we can't control really anything. Like, that's what we're seeing these days. Like, there's so much that we thought was a given that's not. And those of us who are going to be successful are the ones who learn to roll with it and be okay with it not being perfect. And that was always the case. I just think it's more highlighted now.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people that the fact the lockdown and everything that's gone on have actually had to sit back and think, is my life going in the direction that I wanted it to? You know, have I just been going with the flow?
Right.
Or have I actually accomplished something that's meaningful to me? I think a lot of people have changed direction as a result of, or will want to change direction as a result of what's going on.
And having that, like, the personal agency, the feeling like it's safe to evaluate that, because if the answers that I come up with on the other side of this question are, I'm not going in the direction that I want, it's safe to evaluate that because I trust myself to make better decisions for myself.
Mm.
And if you don't have that, that it could be devastating, is what you were describing.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the point of view with my daughter, the thing that stood out for me most was because she was so rule-based and following, she was highly vulnerable. And that was my fear of, when I'm not around anymore to watch her, to look over her, what's going to happen? I mean, I think my other children would step in and help, but only to a certain extent. They're not going to be her keeper forever. They will make sure she's okay, but they wouldn't be the same as a mother is with their child.
Right. They're going to be parents to their own children or in their own lives. Yeah.
And you know, if they want to travel, well, in this day and age, you know,
you had options. Yeah. Okay.
If they want to do a job that's got them all over the world, or they want to go and settle in another country, you know, they have their own lives to live too. And it would be awful for them to feel like they had to give up so many opportunities because she needed so much help. So that was always a goal of mine, to get her as far along as possible. And I definitely think that the whole helping her with the dynamic thinking has been a big part of that, you know, that she can think for herself.
So I was thinking of putting it to the end for impact, but I also don't want to forget to include it. Can you please share how far she has come? It's really,
Okay.
it's really cool to hear how far your daughter's come.
Okay. So we started RDI when she was fast approaching 13. And at that time, as I've said, she was highly prompt dependent. She literally couldn't go anywhere without somebody else basically holding her hand and talking her through, prompting her through. Over the years with RDI and encouraging her to think more for herself and problem solve and be more interactive with other people. So she is now 28. She was meant to get married this year, but because of the present situation, that hasn't happened. We're hoping that next year will be the year. She moved out of home about, well, it's coming up to 2 years actually, to live with her fiance. She has been working in a job for, I'm trying to think now, it's 4+ years. She did an apprenticeship first, and they love her so much that, you know, they took her on full time. And
positions there, right? Of some sort
sorry,
of,
say that again.
she have some sort of a leadership position, or she does some sort of teaching or shit?
She wanted to do, she had tasters, she worked in a hospital in 3 different departments over a school academic year. And from that, she got experience within an admin department, and she decided she wanted to work in admin. But so that her main role is in admin. But the company that she works for sets up apprenticeships for anyone and everyone. And they go around and do talks, and they've encouraged her to go and do talks to encourage other people with special needs to get into apprenticeships. So she actually goes and does presentations as well for them. She basically now also, if people come to the office, she's the person who shows them around the office. She answers the phones. So she has to think on her feet. You know, she's not just following rules anymore. And it's a major, major difference in her life. I can't say she hasn't got autism. She's definitely got autism traits. On saying that, on the ADOS, she doesn't score in the autism range. But there are bits about her that are Alicia,
Right.
you know? Just like there's bits about all of us that are us.
Right.
But her autism doesn't get in her way anymore. You know, if she wants to do something, she just does it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to miss that, but I also don't want to miss again, like the main topic. So you tell me again, it's a committee, I think I'm getting this wrong, what it's called, on dynamic intelligence within the RDI community. Can you share what that work is?
Dr. Gutstein has never stopped trying to improve RDI, which has its setbacks sometimes for us as consultants trying to keep up.
Right.
But the fact that he is forever trying to improve the quality of life for individuals on the spectrum is fantastic. So he has very much his pile of research both on typical development and on autism, and he draws from that. And so as a result, he wanted to increase the capabilities and quality of life by doing more of the dynamic intelligence side of things. And he had set up a working group some years back where he was trying to help us to have a better understanding and from us. So we would take what he was looking at and start to use that with our families, and then we could give feedback. And so that feedback has actually grown how much dynamic intelligence actually plays a part in all of our lives. We've got a better understanding as a group, the dynamic intelligence group. It's very much based on, though Dr. Gutstein doesn't actually like to call it episodic memory, but we would know it as episodic memory. So it's very much based on our emotional, social intelligence and our previous experiences, and how what's happened in the past where we felt successful or we've had to overcome something. So that comes back to this making mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes, influences what we do in the present, but also how we plan for the future.
So that's episodic memory, correct? Yeah.
That's tied with the episodic memory. So, you know, when you're in a situation, you're able to go back and think about, well, that's similar to something that happened before. And in that particular case, I did whatever it is that you did. But if you were thinking of that from a social stories point of view, which is more static, it's like, if I'm in this situation, then I have to do this. But then if that suddenly doesn't work anymore, you're stuck. So with dynamic intelligence, it's a case of thinking about, well, the last time I found, say, something hard, it was really hard to learn how to ride a bike. So you look back at that, and you've got something else that's now coming up that you feel is similar, the feelings you're feeling around the uncertainty of learning how to do something. You can look back and you can think, well, actually, it was tough, but I got to a point where I started feeling good about myself. At what point was it? What did I do? What did I change? What my thinking that actually got me through that, so I didn't just give up? So it's quite complicated, but it all comes together in, like, you draw on those things, you draw on the I can memories, and you draw on the knowledge of self to be able to think about what you're doing in this present time, which is harder than actually thinking about how can I use that, because you're able to pull yourself out of it and think about, I've got this upcoming situation, how can I use what I've got in the past to help me to get through that. So if you're thinking about maybe going for an interview, if we put it into our context, so you'd have been for so many different interviews in the past, and you'll have memories of things that didn't go quite so well and things that went really well. And then you'll have some sort of knowledge about who you're going to go, the company that you're going to for this interview, and what they might want from you. So you can look back on, what was it that I said in that particular interview that put me in a good light, to be able to plan how you would answer particularly difficult questions in the future. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So the whole thing about the dynamic intelligence is helping individuals on the spectrum. First of all, the first hurdle is recognizing the emotions they're actually feeling, then tying those emotions, like reflecting back on that and tying those emotions to how they overcome or how they plan different things that they do, and then thinking about, well, how do I project that into the future to learn about me, to change me, so if they've got this I can't feel about them, how do we make that into a I can in a positive?
And it could be starting with something very simple. I always talk about, like, keeping all of our work under the radar for the parents. Like, yes, I'm sure you would love to start with an hour a day. Like, is that doable? Like, are we setting ourselves up for success? I'm sure you would love, with his college applications, to start there, but, like, does he know the alphabet yet? Like, start, like, very simply. But also not to get discouraged with starting with something smaller, realizing that, like, when it's solid, that you can build on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the foundations of the early side of the RDI program are not in place,
right,
then you're not going to be able to go on and be able to really work on the dynamic intelligence, because you have to have that, what we call the guided participation relationship, in place. You have to have that trust.
Right.
You have to have the child able and willing to take on your experience and your perspective, and to be able to build that into their own knowledge. And if that's not in place, or if they're not able to, what we call synchronize, so
right.
you talked earlier about the dance side of things.
Right.
So if you're not able to synchronize your actions around another person, it's going to be very difficult to take on their perspective, right, or to integrate perspectives.
Because you're not going to notice what they're doing. You're not going to be present with them. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are foundations within the RDI program that absolutely need to be in place, and part of that is how to help a child to build those episodic memories in the first place, to be able to reflect on them, and which is quite a big thing. Quite often, if you talk to a child on the spectrum and you ask them, how was it when you went to the theme park, they will completely rely on telling you the sequence of things that had happened, or there'll be something that's quite abstract to us that they focus on. So it could be, well, the red car went round 3 times, right, rather than any emotion side of that or any experience.
I was scared on the roller coaster, as opposed to I enjoyed the ice cream and I was scared on the roller coaster.
Well, it might be that it was really hot and I took a bite of the ice cream and it was like, bliss, just because you've got that whole sensory side of things happening as well. It's not just, oh, it was fun when I went on that ride. It's, the anticipation of going on that ride, the feel of being on that ride, how some of it might have been, just fine, and other parts would like, heart in your mouth as you're going up or down or whatever. So there's a whole big area that we need to help our children to be able to really experience the experience.
Right. And I think this also goes back to why the parent involvement is so important.
Absolutely.
Because there's only so much of that. Even if we provide that fully in a half-hour session a week, or even an hour-and-a-half session a week, or even 2 hour-and-a-half sessions a week, if they're not getting it throughout their week, if it's not part of everyday life, where the dynamic life is actually happening.
Absolutely. And as parents, we take so much for granted. Well, as individuals generally, as adults, you know, we take so much for granted. We don't necessarily, we're not in touch with those little experiences that mean so much to a child. So we have to look at it all in a different way, and that's only going to happen from episodes that happen in everyday life. So there was used to be a clip that Dr. Gutstein showed years ago of a little boy that had been making Valentine cookies, and when they came out of the oven, they were all in the wrong shapes. They'd all sort of meshed in together, and it was the whole surprise factor of how those cookies, he didn't have a big meltdown about the fact that they weren't what they were meant to look like. He was like, oh my goodness, you know, this is wonderful almost, that look, the cookies have turned out so much different. And he was like really, really surprised, but also pleasantly surprised.
Yes.
And it was part of the whole family were involved. Oh, you know, they went in as hearts and now they're not hearts anymore. So it was like a whole experience in that mistake.
Yeah, like I wonder why that happened.
Yeah.
I wonder if we want to happen again, if we want it to happen again next time, how can we do it? If we don't want it to happen next time, how can we do it?
Yeah, it would open up so many opportunities.
Right.
To be able to.
So what do you think would be some good takeaways that you really want, like other folks in the world of autism, adults on the spectrum, parents, other professionals to get from this conversation?
Basically, there is so much more available out there than for many years individuals on the spectrum and their parents have been led to believe is available. You know, that from doing RDI, relationship development intervention, that more doors open, absolutely more doors will open. Initially, there's that whole mindset change, but once you're over that hurdle,
Right.
it's highly motivating to see the differences that are happening and the difference that you're part of. There are many people that have said to me, oh, it's fantastic what you've done for Alyssa. Actually, no, I think it's fantastic what she's done.
Right.
You know, she is the one who's I've put in effort, but she's put in so much as well. She's continued to want to grow.
Right.
I haven't made her do anything. I've given her the opportunities, but the growth has come from her.
Right. And then it's real.
Yeah.
Then it's there when you're not.
Absolutely. But she can walk away, and her fiance is also got special needs. I wouldn't necessarily say he's on the spectrum, he's got other things that he has. And there are times that he does get a little bit stuck. And it's really interesting to watch how she changes the dynamics of his thinking because of her thinking. So he'd like would get stuck on problem solving, and she would be like encouraging him to think a little bit differently. And it's just wonderful to watch. It really is.
Because it's interesting, because like I was always encouraging when I was in school to, once I had a student that was up to a certain point with whatever we were working on, to then have them pass it on to the next student who was newer at it. And it shows her mastery, not just that she could do this for herself, but she could give it over to her fiance.
And that she has the empathy in that she can see he's struggling and she knows what that feels like.
It's amazing. And that she
encourages him.
wants to help him, but she can. It's so empowering for both of them.
Yeah. I mean, there's other elements that the match is pretty good, because there's other elements because he's not on the spectrum as such, but there's other elements that he's able to help her with too. So it's really sweet. Should I say that? I'm a mum, I can say that.
That's beautiful. So I'm sure when folks see this, they're going to want to know how to contact you. So tell us the name of your business, how to contact you. And you also have Facebook presence?
I do. I have a Facebook page, which is Thinking in Shades of Grey. My company is Thinking in Shades of Grey as well. My website is Autism Thinking in Shades of Grey. I have a Facebook group that I basically run with Kathy Darrow, who's also an autism mum and RDI consultant, which is called Autism Guide.
Thank you so much. And I'm Julie Meyerowitz with Hear My Words RDI, and that's hearmywordsautism.com. Thank you so much.